You found a podcast where you'll hear the truth, and we will praise Jesus' name. We stand for the Bible and won't back down from it, although it don't bring much fame. Some folks will like it, some will try to deny it, but God's word will always stand true. It's been tried in the fire.
We want to thank you for joining us on our 466th episode on the Pod King Bible Study. My name's Donnie King.
And I'm Donald King. We appreciate you tuning in today. Man, oh man, do we have a good study today or what?
Well, it's not the or what, and I certainly feel like we do. This is an episode on a showdown between the two things that people must decide between.
Yeah, money or faith. Now, which one will you cling to, my friends? This isn't a light decision you must make. It could determine your eternity.
That's right. And if you're going to preach to everybody already, we might as well just get the study underway and do it right here from the get-go.
Well, let's do it.
I'll read our next verse in this 6th chapter, and you can start commenting since you seem so ready. 1 Timothy 6:8, and having food and raiment, let us be therewith content.
In this short verse, Paul tells us how to be content in the Lord. He said if we have food to eat and clothes to wear, we should be content. Now, that sounds simple enough, doesn't it?
I wish it was that simple. And I'm not saying it's impossible to live what Paul said, but it does seem to be hard in the day and hour we live in, when everybody around you has 2 brand new vehicles or maybe more and a super nice home, and they have everything, boats and ATVs and you name it, they've got everything, and you just got food and raiment. It's kind of hard to be content in our culture. This sounds similar to what Paul said in Philippians 4:11 and also what the writer of Hebrews said in Hebrews 13:5. Paul said he was content in whatsoever state he was in, and in Hebrews the writer said he was content with such things as he had. He then reminded us of the promise that Jesus gave us when he said that he would be with us and he would not forsake us.
Well, knowing this will produce contentment on our part.
That's right. How could you not be content knowing that Jesus is with you?
Yeah.
The original Greek wording here is having sustenance and coverings, let us be therewith satisfied. So in other words, if you have something to eat and you've got clothing to put on and cover yourself up with, you should be satisfied.
Notice that he didn't say we could be satisfied if we have steak and prime rib, nor did he say to be satisfied as long as we have 3 freezers filled with meat. He didn't say we need a refrigerator packed with food and a pantry full of groceries either. He just said to be content if we have food to eat.
That's true. And you might not have what you want, but if it is food to eat, then you should be satisfied. Some people have pointed out that sustenance harkens back to the Old Testament. It reminds us of the gleanings left in the corners of the fields for the poor. Now, that word sustenance is linked with the poor. And so when you are told to just be satisfied with the food you have and the clothes you have on, that does sound like it was written more for a poor person. You might not own the field, and you might not get the full crop in, but at least you can eat from someone else's bounty and abundance.
He didn't say that we had to have name brand apparel to be satisfied. He didn't say that it had to be brand new clothing to be satisfied.
No.
All he said was we should be satisfied if we have clothing, period.
That's true. And I remember going through my teens, and I was so upset when my mom would buy me a shirt from the Goodwill or some kind of thrift store. I wanted a name brand shirt like everybody else was wearing. Well, she'd tell me, I got you a name brand. It's just been owned by somebody else before. So you might not be able to afford mall brand apparel nor wear a $1,000 pair of shoes. But if your body is covered with clothing and you got shoes on your feet, you should still be content. Some people grew up eating leftovers and wearing hand-me-downs their whole lives.
That's right. And somehow we made it through love.
Yeah, I like the way you just put a claimer on that.
Yeah, I'm used to that.
It wasn't as bad as you had 3 sisters.
Yeah.
You probably look funny with those hand-me-downs.
Yeah.
People who haven't had much seem happier with what they do have than those who have had everything they've ever desired. It seems like they appreciate those things even more. I'd really like to know how to appreciate the good things in life. And the only way that I can do that is appreciate all things that God does for me in life. I'm going to read verse 9 and see where this takes us. 1 Timothy 6:9, but they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. To me, this verse seems very sobering, and I want to point everybody to something here that can be misconstrued very easily. Notice what Paul doesn't say. Paul doesn't say they who are rich, but he says they that will be rich.
I noticed that. So why do you think he worded it that way?
Well, the main point is he isn't rebuking people who have money. He's rebuking people who chase after riches.
So he's reprimanding that spirit which drives a man to become rich.
That's the sin right there, is that drives you to want to be rich. He's tackling selfish ambition. But more plainly, it's the love of money that he's dealing with. We see Jesus mention the same very thing in Matthew 13 and 22. Let me read you that. He also that receives seed among the thorns is he that heareth the word, and the care of this world, and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becometh unfruitful. The cares of life and the deceitfulness of riches will always end up choking the life of the believer. It does this until the believer becomes unfruitful. In Matthew 19 and 23, Jesus also warns us against men who have riches.
The problem with rich people is that they become servants to their money. Eventually, money becomes their God rather than the Lord himself. Solomon warned us in Proverbs 23 and 4 not to labor to be rich.
That is true. But I do want to ask you a question. Did you learn that in our book study of Proverbs that we did?
I did. Hey, the audience isn't the only one getting something out of these studies.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. The Bible isn't telling us that we should forego working, making a living, or paying our bills. That's absolutely not what is being said here. This is talking about people who strive to become rich through any means and through all means. Those who will be rich could be seen as those who will themselves to be rich. I'm going to make it no matter what. If I have to knock somebody down to climb above them, I'm going to be somebody. I'm going to have money. I'm not going to be poor all my life. They have a driving force that emanates from their will, pushing them to acquire riches. The Greek word behind this translates as to wish or to want.
Okay, so we could say it's about those who wish to be rich.
That's true.
Those who want to be rich and those who aspire to be rich. It isn't those people who have or possess riches that is guilty here. This is talking about those who love riches. They are the guilty ones.
That's it. And see, if you're not careful, you get a false idea of what Paul says right here. Because we tend to think that just because somebody has money, they must be full of the love of money. I mean, obviously, this guy, he hit it rich. He must love money. Well, what if he just happened to fall into that? What if he inherited that and he was just as common as you and I, but yet he fell into that because somebody passed away and left him a lot? That doesn't mean that he would have cut somebody's throat to get that money. That doesn't mean that he'd have done a bad business deal to get the money, even though there are people out there who will do those things. Everybody that is rich isn't bad, and they're not wrong. Paul said that these people who love riches are the ones who's going to fall into temptation. I don't know about you, but I believe we have to deal with enough temptations in life. There's no sense in bringing other temptations upon ourselves. And not only will they fall into temptation, but they will eventually fall to that temptation.
Yeah, I reckon so. They're headed towards a snare that the devil's laid for their soul. I don't have any desire to try to avoid more snares than it's already laid for me.
No.
You know, this is the second time that Paul has mentioned a snare in this book, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I'm glad you mentioned it, because the first time he called it the snare of the devil when he was speaking of novices back in 1 Timothy 3 and 7. You remember he said, don't let a novice become a bishop. And he said, because he will fall into the snare of the devil. Well, here we are in chapter 6, and he mentions a snare again.
Yeah, this tells us that the devil has many snares he can use. I guarantee you that he's willing to use them on anyone he can.
I'd say you're right. Now, this type of man that Paul's describing not only falls into temptation and a snare, but he will also fall into many lust. And more specifically, he will fall into foolish lust. Paul goes even farther and says this man will fall into hurtful lust.
What do you reckon would classify as a foolish lust? And what would a hurtful lust be composed of?
Well, just thinking about lust in itself, it would be foolish for anybody to fall to lusting because God gives us victory over that. Any lust that pulls your heart away from God, in one sense, to me, would be foolish. But some people would be willing to trade their soul for just a few minor things. that drives them to seek that thing that would cause them to go away from God, that is so foolish. So to me, that would have to be classified as a sin you would throw your relationship away with God for. Whatever would cause you to walk away from God would be a foolish lust. A hurtful lust would be one that not only hurts you, hurts the heart of God, but it hurts other people as well. And I'm glad that you noticed that these ideas were separated apart from each other. Mm-hmm. To me, I believe that this can be interpreted this way, but not all people agree.
Wait a minute. I guess it didn't even dawn on me that this could be debatable. Is this one statement regarding lust with a few ways it can be seen? Or could these be several different types of lust?
Yeah, and that's a good question. And if anyone else has a question that you'd like us to give an answer for, email us at dkministries1977@yahoo.com, and we'll do our best to work it into one of our monthly Q&As. So now, as for your question, you're asking if foolish lust and hurtful lust are the same thing, or are they different, right?
Right.
Okay, I believe the key word here is found in what the apostle said. Paul said they would fall into many of these lusts, which is definitely more than one. He said they'll fall into many foolish and hurtful lusts. Because of this, I believe it appears that there is definitely more than one kind or one type of thing going on here.
How do you like that? That never quite clicked in my brain.
Well, that's not the only thing, but the word here for drown is bathidzo. Bathidzo literally means to sink or to go underwater. It's the straight line description of a person literally drowning in water that's too deep. The only other time this word is used in the Bible is in Luke chapter 5, verse 7. This is where the disciples caught so many fish, the number of the fish was so great, and the weight of the fish began to push the two ships down until they began to sink. And that's the exact same word. You're going to sink with these lusts that are pushing you under.
These lusts, as with all lust, will drown men in destruction and perdition. I don't want to drown in any way, but this sounds like an awful way to do it.
You ain't kidding. But the wording here is slightly confusing for some people. They find it hard to follow. And that's mainly because it's easy to think of destruction and perdition as being the same thing.
Well, count me in that group. Their meanings are very similar.
That's exactly right. In the original Greek, the two words, though, are from the same root word. Interestingly enough, it appears that the second word is explaining or modifying the first. So what I'm saying is, it could be interpreted as destruction and waste instead of destruction and perdition.
In other words, they will be destroyed and done away with.
Yes.
So this speaks of a total destruction, which may be tied to everlasting destruction.
And that's what's so serious about this. If this is a total destruction, this means that you could totally lose your soul over this topic we're talking about. And we're talking about people who love money. You could be lost and go to hell because you love money more than you love God. Now, this destruction, this perdition, this waste, let's go to 2 Thessalonians 1:9, and I'll show you something about it here. It says, who shall be punished with everlasting destruction from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his power. This is also the same type of destruction. It's an everlasting one, an eternal destruction. Many people see a strong connection between the ending of this verse and of 1 Timothy 1:19. Men drowning in destruction and perdition is linked to those who have made shipwreck. Think about it.
Well, once a ship is wrecked, the danger of drowning is certainly possible.
Yes.
Well, this tells us something important about those who will be rich. They are also those who will throw away their faith to make shipwreck.
That's true. And in their minds, they weren't planning on making shipwreck. They were going to sail high. I mean, they were going to see sights they had only dreamed of. You don't load onto a ship with the desire, I'll probably sink in the ocean and drown and die.
No.
You normally think, I'm going to go on a wonderful voyage and see some beautiful scenery I've never seen before. So they get on this boat and they start sailing. But here's the problem. These people cast their faith away in search of riches, and that's what caused them to make shipwreck. They end up drowning in destruction and perdition, and they're totally wasted and their lives are ruined.
While we're already here, let's go on into the next verse, which goes deeper. 1 Timothy 6:10. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which, while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Now, this is the pinnacle of these verses warning against the desire for riches.
It is. In this 10th verse right here, Paul gives us his reasoning behind what he said in verse 9. Those who will be rich will fall into many foolish and hurtful lusts. The reason for this is that the love of money is the root of all evil.
Okay, notice here that he didn't say that money is the root of all evil, but the love of money is.
That is right. Money is the object of desire,
Right.
so the desire for the money is where the sinfulness is.
Well, it isn't a sin to have money, or else we'd all be sinners on payday.
Ain't that the truth? I'd only be a small sinner.
Yeah, a little sinner.
Kind of like Lot. Could I just go to that city? Is it not a little one? You look like a sinner because you like money. Well, I'm just a little sinner because I've only got a little money.
Yeah.
Whether you're rich or you're poor, if you love money, you have the root of all evil within you.
Now, that's an interesting take on this. You think poor people can be guilty of this?
Oh, absolutely. Some poor people are just as guilty or even more guilty of loving money than rich people are. I believe this is also linked to what Paul said in 2 Timothy 3:2. This is where he spoke of men being lovers of themselves in the last days.
Okay, now you've got me all baffled now. You need to explain this to me.
Well, the reason I would love money is because of what it would get me or what it would bring me. It'd give me what I want. It brings me what I desire. I only love money because it benefits me. I can do whatever I want to when I have money. I can only love money after first loving myself. Can you see that the true love of money is a selfish and prideful desire?
I sure do. Why would I love money if it did nothing for me? Would I love money the same if it only benefited others and not myself? If we didn't care so much for ourselves, we wouldn't battle the love of money.
You're right. And it was the love of money that Paul says some coveted after that caused them to err from the faith. That is an extreme love of money, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Or is that extreme for us today in the world we live in?
Well, it actually seems more common than it ought to be.
It really is. These people threw away their faith they had in God because they love money so much. Just take a moment and allow that knowledge to soak into your brain. They literally love money more than the God who created them, the God who heals them when they're sick, the God who saved them when they were lost, and they would walk away from God just for money.
Talk about having your priorities out of line.
Yeah, well, they made money their God rather than the Lord Jesus Christ. Instead of setting up an idol and taking a Buddha and setting it up on a shelf and bowing down and praying to it or any other kind of idolatrous thing, their search for wealth was what they began to bow down to.
Folks, rather than setting up a statue, their wealth is what they worship. They broke the very first commandment through this false love.
That's right. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. And it doesn't matter if it's Mammon or it's Molech. If you got another god before the Lord, it's idolatry.
That's right.
This is why these people cast their faith away, Paul said. No man can serve two masters, according to Jesus. They became enslaved to the very thing they thought they wanted. And isn't that really the way it usually happens? The thing that you think you want, it begins to enslave you and entrap you. The very thing a person desires more than God himself will end up being the master over them, and they'll be the slave to it.
Yeah, the one that they cast away from money and riches is the one who owns everything. And as a matter of fact, he is the creator of everything. God said that all the silver and the gold were his.
Yeah, and that means that he can give it to whoever he desires to have it. If I were to seek something, wouldn't it make sense to seek it from the source or the person who has access to the source? If God is the source of healing, shouldn't I search for healing from him? If Jesus is the source of salvation, why would I think I could find salvation anywhere else? Now, back to the point. If the Lord owns all the silver and all the gold, like he said, he is the source that I should be seeking.
How many Christians actually battle with this sin? And I'm speaking directly of the love of money here.
Well, I'm afraid that there's too many. If there's one, there's too many.
Yeah.
If you love money, you might lie on your tax returns. You might even beat somebody out of money and then try to justify yourself in some way. Well, I know he didn't need it anyway, and, he's rich enough, he ain't going to miss that. And you might skip tipping your server or bypass the offering plate at church. There's a lot of things that you might do if you love money.
Gracious. Sounds like you're either trying to make everyone mad or convict them.
Well, I'd like to convict them. Sure don't want to make them mad, but if they're guilty of those things, they need to realize there's something behind the reason you're not doing these things the right way. And it could be the love of money. Money is an item, okay? It's a thing that we need in life to survive. I understand that. It's a tool or a resource at best. Money should never take the place of people. We are to use things, and money is a thing, and we're to love people. We're never to get that backwards. We might even have to use our things to be a help to people. Do I love the thing and use people, or do I love people and use the thing called money? Can I deny myself, take up the cross, but at the same time be guilty of loving money too?
I believe this is a serious subject that we're dealing with. I honestly don't see how that could be possible to you.
No, and inherent in the love of money is the fear that God might not give you what you need or the amount that you want. You may want more than what you have, and you think that God's doing you an injustice because he's not giving you what you feel like you deserve. So rather than taking what he gives us, we go off in search of more. When you embark on this search, it's a search totally detached from the Lord himself.
If you do that, this means you're willingly walking away from God. This isn't a description of someone who is somehow led astray. There's a difference between following a desire within your heart and being deceived by a false teacher.
Yeah, and this points to the will of man, again, as we saw in verse 9. I'll say this, a person can be led astray by a false teacher for money, but this is very specific here. There is a strong implication of the person erring from the faith in a willful manner.
Paul says that these people who love money have coveted after it. He was saying that they had also broken another of the 10 commandments. I know some people might disagree with me, but coveting isn't regarded as terrible. It's almost looked at as one of the lesser of the sins within the 10 commandments.
Yeah, I agree with that. It almost seems harmless compared to murder and idolatry, but it isn't. Allow me to explain what it means to covet something, just in case somebody doesn't quite know. Say, I have a truck right now, but coveting doesn't actually mean that you want a truck like I have. It means you literally want the truck that I have.
Okay, I get it. Most people teach coveting is desiring what other people have. And most people think this means you want a boat or a four-wheeler like someone has. But in reality, it's the desire for something that someone else owns or possesses. Now, that really pulls it much closer to home.
It really does. And think about it this way. If I covet after money, that means that someone else owns it right now, but I want it. How often do we hear it said, boy, I'd like to have his money? That is a statement of coveting. Man, I'd like to have his bank account for a day.
Once again, I never gave sayings like that much thought.
Yeah, well, what if you wanted the man's wife? Could you say the same thing? Man, I'd love to have his wife for a day. But we say that about money and don't think a thing about it. Man, I'd like to have his truck for a day. Man, I'd like to have his home for a week. Could we desire to have these things for one day, 1 week, or for good?
Well, in reality, it is no different. Say that I wanted your truck and then you passed away and I was able to get it. If that made me happy, then I have a terrible problem.
That's true, but do you see how easy it is for us to love a possession more than a human? This is the sin of loving money. It's a thing that can be used. We are to love people and to use things. Now, there was a man years ago that come to see us, and my grandmother had a really old clock in the house. He was no kin to us, just a friend, and he looked around and he told my grandmother, he said, Sister King, when you die, I'd sure like to have that clock. You know what that made me feel like? Not because I wanted the clock, but it made me feel like he wants Grandma to die so he can have the crazy clock. He cares for that clock more than he cares for my grandmother. That kind of offended me. I was a younger man, and I thought of it in maybe a different way. But what about people who can't wait for their parent to die so they can inherit what they have? The love of money causes us to use people while we are loving a thing. This corrupt love will cause us to err from the faith. I believe this is as bad as leaving the true religion for a cult. God views this the same way as worshiping Buddha. In God's eyes, to worship money more than you worship God is the same as bowing towards Mecca and praying to Allah.
It is an error in our faith because we've trusted in the wrong thing. Paul said that these people pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Do you think of Saul when you read this?
Absolutely. Saul killed himself after being wounded on the battlefield. Yeah. He fell on his own sword, ending his life. Those who love money more than God will wind up leaving their faith in Christ, and that's causing them to fall on their own sword, so to speak, that pierces them through with many sorrows. This is not an unusual occurrence either. The love of money is very common today.
Money is one of the biggest competitors God has to face in our time. We know God is greater than money, so there isn't even a fight between them. One is an omnipotent creator, the other is a simple created thing.
That's right, and it shows us how weak of a God people will follow as long as it brings them what they want. I believe that coveting is the sin that most people ignore or fail to see. Do you agree with that?
I do, but thankfully, Paul doesn't leave us right here. He changes tone in the next verse and begins talking about true teachers of God. All right, 1 Timothy 6:11. But thou, O man of God, flee these things and follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, meekness. There are quite a few things we need to look at here. For one, the tone shifts from negative things over to positive things.
Yeah, I noticed that. And instead of telling us what we shouldn't do, he now begins telling us what we should be doing. Then there is also a debate regarding how we should understand who this is directed to. Paul says, O man of God. Now, is he speaking to every minister? Is this directed to Christian men in general? Or does this designation apply only to Timothy himself?
I honestly don't know how to answer those questions. We need to go over a few things that should help us narrow this down. Paul has specifically spoken to several different groups already. We have bishops, deacons, their wives, elders, widows, false teachers, and more.
Yeah, and now he says something that almost seems vague, but we know that it isn't meant to be vague.
No.
He's got something in mind. The problem is on our end, and it's with our own personal understanding. Is this for everyone, or is this only for a few people?
Was this specifically for Timothy alone?
Well, it might not seem like a big deal to those listening in, but this can become a problem depending on where you land. I believe how you feel about this will cause you to look at things differently than you ought to if you look at it the wrong way. I personally believe the answer is found in what these things we're told to flee. He told us to flee the love of money, covetousness, temptations, snares, sorrows, foolish lust, and hurtful lust.
Should only Timothy flee these things? Should only the ministers flee these things? I believe it's good advice for all of us to follow, and especially the ministers.
That's why I laid it out like I did, because when you look at just this one phrase, O thou man of God, flee these things, it looks like, oh, it's probably only for the minister. And Timothy is the preacher he's writing to, so this has got to be only for Timothy. Timothy is to flee these things. Okay, that's great. But when he mentions the love of money, covetousness, temptation, snares, or all of these things, is Timothy the only one supposed to be doing good and not doing these things? No, this is for everyone. So I believe that this is directed firstly to Timothy, then to the church at Ephesus secondarily, and then everyone else that will ever read this. I believe you'll see why I say this when we examine a few things later on that's connected to this. He said that the man of God should follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, and meekness.
Okay. Are ministers the only ones who need to follow these things?
See, that's another problem we run into. If we say it's only for Timothy or only for a preacher, then are only preachers supposed to live righteous? Are preachers the only ones to be godly and have faith? Are preachers the only ones supposed to show love and have patience and be meek? No. So here we find that once again, I believe that this is pointed a little more towards the ministry as a safeguard, but I also believe it can and does apply for all believers. I think that the term man of God is a term that the Old Testament designated the prophets with, but I don't think it's limited to only the prophets.
Yeah, it was used of anyone who spoke on behalf of God.
Well, that's why I can see it being addressed to Timothy, but applicable to all ministers or anyone who has anything to say in a church service.
Most scholars say it's only spoken to Timothy, but it is good morality for the minister.
Yeah, and that might be so, but I believe we also need to take 2 Timothy 3:17 into consideration too then. Right there in that passage, he's giving instruction to the same man and to the same church. It's to Timothy, it's the church of Exodus. And in this setting, he's been speaking of how Scripture is given by the inspiration of God.
Amen. For Paul was talking about the Scriptures and how they should be used. He went on to say in verse 17 that the man of God may be perfect. Once again, this is being spoken to the ministry, but it would do us all well to live by this.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. Some people argue that this is only for Timothy, and they use 2 Timothy 2:22 to prove their point. This is where Timothy was told to flee youthful lust. Once again, is only Timothy the one that needs to flee youthful lust? I mean, he's the only person in the whole church of Ephesus that might have a youthful lust. Now, I understand he was a young man, but was he the only young person in the church? Right here in 1 Timothy 6, the man of God is told to flee these things, specifically linked to the love of money. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, Paul also gave a list of things Timothy should follow after instead. There is a better way than the way that comes naturally to a man, because the way that comes natural to a man seems right to him, and the Bible says that leads to death.
This may be part of that same right way Solomon warned us about. God's ways are better than ours, for they are higher than our ways. In all your ways acknowledge the Lord, and he shall direct your path. God's way is much better than anything we can come up with.
You ain't kidding. After telling us to flee these things, Paul tells us to follow some things. He tells us to follow after righteousness first.
Why do you reckon he chose to say righteousness first?
Well, if you want to be right with God, you got to have righteousness. So technically, you couldn't keep any of the other things until you're right with God. How could you show love to someone and treat them with respect and dignity and patience if you're not right with God? We definitely need righteousness, but not our own style or brand of it. You don't need Donnie King's righteousness. You need the righteousness of Jesus Christ. We are to follow after the righteousness of God rather than seeking to see righteousness within ourselves. Because if we follow the righteousness of God, we will become righteous as he is righteous.
Well, he said that we need to follow after godliness too.
Yeah, and once again, we must be seeking God in order to receive godliness. Do you think anybody could become godly by not seeking God and not being around him?
No.
We can't be godly within ourselves.
That's right.
We only find that in the Lord himself. Now, we are to also follow after faith. And this isn't as simple as it first sounds. I think we should ponder how we should discern what Paul meant by this. We know that we're not to follow after faith in general because that could lead us anywhere. I mean, we could be talking about, I got faith my lawnmower is going to start. Is that the faith you need to follow? Following faith in itself can lead us into deception because there's many forms of faith. And as a matter of fact, many times it leads you astray.
There are many faiths, which we usually term as religions. In reality, there are several different types of faith. We might have faith that our lawnmower will start, but this is not what he means.
No.
Rather than following Buddhism, you could go with more of a Unitarian faith.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because we know different terms for faith, and we can talk about faith or faiths, but Paul wasn't talking about religions nor denominations here.
Is he even talking about the faith we're saved by within our hearts?
That's a good question. Let's zero down on this for a moment. Are we to follow after our faith that we placed in the Lord or the faith? Personally, this is where I land on what Paul is telling us here more than anything else. I think it's the faith more than it's my faith I place in Christ. He said to follow faith. All right, in Ephesians 4, Paul stressed the fact that there is only one faith, and that's not yours and that's not mine. It is the faith, that which all believers must come to in order to follow Jesus.
He said that we are to follow after love as well. We know this isn't speaking of earthly love. It's not high enough. It's not speaking of sensual love, for it's not pure enough. Paul's not speaking of carnal love, for it's not holy enough. So this must be speaking of the love of God, or God himself, for he is love.
That's what John told us in 1 John 4 and 8. So I agree with that. Yes, when he speaks of love, there's one specific type of love, but it's not sensual, it's not carnal, it's not any of those earthly things. He also said that we're to follow after patience, which means that we're to seek this virtue. That goes against the grain for a lot of people. I've had a lot of people tell me, hey, I ain't praying for patience because trouble only comes with that.
Oh, yeah, I've heard ministers caution their congregation to be careful praying for patience. Their reasoning is from Romans 5, where Paul said that tribulation worketh patience. Now, folks, tribulation is not the only way patience comes.
No, men, if you want to be patient, get married.
Yeah.
You'll learn how to get patience one way or the other.
If you don't have it, you will.
Yeah, and if you don't, you'll find out that you need it too. You're exactly right in what you were saying. Man, I will say that there's not a gift of patience either. I don't read in the gifts of the Spirit where you're gifted with patience. So we're to follow after it. We're to try to obtain that. I personally don't believe that it is in man himself to find what he needs regarding patience. I feel that this patience is a godly virtue that only comes from God himself. This patience isn't so much being able to sit in the parking lot at Hobby Lobby for an hour before you get upset that your wife's in the store. This is a patience that gives you what you need and waiting on God, waiting for the promise to come through, waiting for the Spirit of God to move. This is the kind of patience he's talking about.
Well, who has shown patience any greater than that of the Lord himself? We must be like him in order to know true patience.
Yeah, and the last item in this list that we're to follow after is meekness. This is another character trait that must be acquired from the Lord. You don't just wake up one day and you're meek. If I am meek, how did I acquire this trait? It didn't come from me. I wasn't born with a ton of meekness.
Well, this alone tells us that we must get meekness from the Lord. In 2 Timothy 2:25, Paul tells us to instruct people with meekness. To do that, you must have spiritual strength and leadership qualities.
That's very true. And not everybody you meet has spiritual strength. They're not strong spiritually. Not everybody you run into has true leadership qualities, and that shows us everybody doesn't have meekness. This should also tell us that meekness is not weakness, as the world seems to think.
Okay, hey, I think our time's expired for this week.
Yeah, I think it has. As bad as I hate to admit, I guess we're going to have to shut her down for today, but guess what? We want to invite everyone back for our 467th episode next Monday on Fighting the Good Fight of Faith.
But for me, this I know, really changed my heart all around. Put my feet back on the ground, got along. Now for heaven I want to go. I want to go. I want to go to that land where the milk and honey flow. Oh, I've heard of such a place. I can't go there by God's grace. Never seen it, but I know I want to go.